Welcome. In this demonstration, we will look at what is Active Directory and how you can create organizational units and users within it. Active Directory is a part of ADDS or Active Directory Domain Service within Windows servers. If you are new, what you should know is that Active Directory is a server component, and I have posted a separate video on how you can install it on your Windows Server 2019 earlier. You can go ahead and check that out if you want to know how you can install these components. You can think Active Directory as a better way to manage large number of users and resources such as client computers, printers, shared storage, etc. by dividing components of a domain into manageable smaller divisions. Other than that, I will not go into any more detail behind Active Directory, but instead we will look at some default ADDS components and how we can create new organizational units and users. Organizational units or OUs let you logically separate objects such as user accounts, service accounts, or computer accounts. Organizational units also allow you to delegate admin tasks to users groups without having to make him or her the administrator of the directory. The groups, on the other hand, are used to assign permissions to company resources by grouping accounts and resources and applying access controls on those groups. It is easier to explain this with an example. So let's go ahead and look at an example. Imagine NetIT Geeks has two departments. One called content creation, the other one called social media. I would create two OUs, one for the content creation and the other one for the social media. Now imagine if we have two major groups in each organizational unit. For example, managers and employees. In that case, I will create a manager group and employees group in each of these organizational units. Let's say one of the organizational units, the social media unit, needs one more group. Let's say it's an accounting group or something like that. And then you can add another group within this social media department as the accounting group. So basically, organizational unit is on top of the group in the hierarchy of the domain controller. This allows you to delegate admin tasks to each organizational unit while the groups restrict the resources within each organizational unit. So imagine you are part of the organizational unit called content creation. As an employee, you should have access to certain resources such as printers, YouTube account, Twitter account, etc. As managers, you should not only have access to those accounts, but also should have access to employees' accounts. So maybe you want to delegate that the managers of this organizational unit will have access to resetting passwords of the employees of the content creation organizational unit, but not the employees for the social media. And then you can set the managers of the social media team can reset the passwords for the employee group within this only the social media organizational unit, but not the content creation employees. So just to recap, as a domain controller, you can delegate the administration task to each organizational unit, which will impact all the groups underneath it. But using groups, you can further restrict those administration tasks just to the managers, but not to the employees, for example. So it's just like a tree structure. It starts with the domain controller. So the administrator for your domain will have full control over everything underneath it. Then we will have organizational units, which will subdivide your organization into separate department or divisions. And within those divisions or departments, you can further subdivide into groups, allowing more control over your organization. Especially the organizations with large number of users and resources, this is very helpful in terms of controlling who has access to what resources. I can go into much more detail on domain controllers and Active Directory components. However, for today, the only thing you need to understand is that the organizational units break down the domain into separate sections. Think of it as a grouping of individual departments, and the groups allow you to manage individual components within those departments. So it will give you further fine control over your organization. So you have the domain controller and the domain administrator who can divide the organization into organizational unit, and who can also further divide each of those organizational units into separate groups for delegation and control of different resources within your network. Now let's go back to our Windows Server and just look at some default configurations and how we can create organizational units, groups, and users. Once you have installed the Active Directory domain controller on your Windows Server, you can go to top menu item called Tools. Under Tools, click on the option called Active Directory, Users and Computers. On the Active Directory, Users and Computers, on the left-hand pane, you will see your domain, because this has to be a domain promoted server in order for you to have the Active Directory domain services running. If you expand your domain, you will see your default items such as the domain controllers, the computers, and the option called built-in. So by default, there are some built-in groups that has been added by the Microsoft when you install Active Directory Domain Controller, such as, for example, the IUSRS account group, which is basically for the Internet and Information Services, for your web services, for example. On earlier video, I have shown you how to install the IIS, FTP and HTTP services. So this group has been added as a result of that. You can also see a few other groups such as the guest groups and backup operation, account operation, users groups. So these are typical default user groups that has been created under your domain when you install Active Directory Domain Controller and promote your server to a domain. Under Domain Controllers, you will see that your server, in my case this is SSServe, is listed there. So if I minimize this one a little bit, you'll see my server is named SSServe and it is showing up under Domain Controllers. So if you go further down, you'll see another option folder, important folder called Users. Under Users, you should see any users that has been added onto your domain controller. So currently the only user that is being used right now is the one called Administrator, that has the built-in administrator account for this particular domain controller. You can also see there are few groups within these users as well, such as the DSCP administrators and enterprise admins, guest, etc., etc. So these are actually the default users and groups that comes with the Active Directory domain controller. Now, if you want to create a user or organizational unit, what you can do is you can select your domain from the left hand side, right click on the blank space here. So on the left hand side blank space, when you right click, it'll give you this option menu, and on this option menu you'll see the option called new, and under new you have the option to add a computer, contact, group, and bunch of other things. What we are interested in is the organizational unit and groups. So to create the organizational unit on your main domain, just make sure you select that one, and on the right hand side right click and then go to new, and we'll go organizational unit, and it's going to ask what you're going to name your organizational unit. So I'm going to call it Net IT Geeks, and I'm going to click OK, and that will create an organizational unit or OU under the name Net IT Geeks. So you have a domain which is sanuja.local, and under that domain we have an organizational unit called Net IT Geeks. Now within this organizational unit I can create my two units that I decided to create, which is the content creation and social media. So those are just fake departments that I decided to come up with for the example. On the right hand side within the organizational unit, right click just like the last time, go to new, and I'm going to create two organizational units underneath it. So let's say we're going to create an organizational unit called content creation, and within Net IT Geeks I'm going to create another organizational unit, and we're going to call that one let's see, organization unit, we're going to call that one as social media. So I have decided to go with the structure where I have sanuja.local, the main domain, then I created organizational unit for it, my organization called Net IT Geeks, and underneath it I created two different organization units called content creation and social media. At the beginning of this video, during that example, I had the Net IT Geeks as the domain, but you don't have to. You could have a separate domain, and then you can have Net IT Geeks, our company, as another organizational unit within the domain. Now, what this means, basically, I can delegate certain policies to this organizational unit, and it will impact the organizational units within the Net IT Geeks. Now, within the organizational units, for example, content creation, I'm going to create two groups, the employees and managers. So I'm going to select the content creation, and on the right hand pane, right click. I'm going to go for new, and then we're going to add a group. So when you try to create a group, you'll get this window called new object group, and it'll tell you where it's been created. It created under sanuja.local, Net IT Geeks organizational unit, under content creation organizational subgroup subunit. So I'm going to name this as managers, for example, managers. And typically the scope should be global and the type should be security. I will explain the differences between global, domain, local, universal, and security and distribution on a later video. But just for now, just go with the defaults, which are global and security, and click OK. And I'm going to create another organizational unit. And this time it's going to be employees. So we're going to go new, and we're going to create a group. Not an organization unit, we're going to create a group called employees. So now we have two groups. So we have NetIT Geeks, we have content creation organizational unit within the NetIT Geeks organizational unit, and then we have two groups called managers and employees. Under managers, you can click inside the manager. You will see that it shows some configuration options, which I will go into detail on a later video. And how we're going to add employees to these units is basically under this organizational unit, which is content creation. We can right click, go to new, and we can add a user. So I'm going to call this user manager A. And I'm just going to call it manager dot A for the user. I want to give password just typically in a company environment, you should set this to password must change at next login, and not this option, but this is just for demonstration purposes. So I have a manager A. I'm going to create another one. So for demonstration purposes, I just created two users. Now we can assign these users to a global group here. So how you're going to do that is you can right click on one of these users, and you can select the option called add to a group. And I'm going to add managers to the group called managers. So if I type man and check names, that's managers, click OK. And this one, also the next person, the managers, I'm going to add it to the managers group. So add to a group, managers. Okay. Now, if you go to the managers group and if you go to members, you will see those two users under the members of that group. You can actually automate this process. If you have like a large number of employees with large number of departments and groups, you can automate this with a PowerShell script, which I will explain on a later video once we get into more in depth of how Active Directory works. But for now, that's how you add members to a group. So like you can create like employees, for example. So let's go ahead and create some employees. Again, we will go through the same process to add them to a group of called employees. Basically right click, add to group, and I'm going to put an employee group. Also notice, because I only have one group called employee, I only need to type like EMP or EM, then it can automatically find that group, so that you don't need to even type the whole name. Like for example, if I type EMP and if I go check name, it will actually give you a return back with that information. And that is a really neat feature, so you don't have to keep typing in the whole name. But again, with the Windows PowerShell script, you don't even need to do this at all. I will show you how to do that on a later video. So now if we go to employees group and go to members, you'll see those two employees, employee A and employee B. If I go to managers group and if I go to members, and you can see the managers have the manager A and manager B. So that's how you create Active Directory users and groups. In future videos, I will go into depth of how you can use these organizational structures to apply group policies, which is a different section in Active Directory Domain Controller. It's called the Group Policy Management. And I will show you how you can use that to delegate control and other directives such as administrative tasks to organizational units or groups. Just before I end the video, I'll show you everything we have done in this Active Directory users and computers section is being populated on here in our the group policy management section, so that we can actually use policies from here apply to the users and groups that we created over here. Like for example, we have the Net IT Geeks we just created here, and we have the content creation group, organizational unit and the social media unit. So I will explain how we can do the group policy management and do a demonstration on a different video. But now you know how you can create users and groups, and basic idea about how the structure of domain controllers, organizational units and groups within Active Directory domain services work. Until next time, have a nice day.